Part 13. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 132. Shen Yu quickly went back, closed the door and reopened the letter. With just 2 glances, she put down the letter and finally determined that there was a big problem. The letter was written 3 years ago and was signed on June 18, the 15th year of Tongxiu. What the letter said was that there would be rain in Qicame Mountain a few days after June 23. Qicame is close to Bailin, and the letter sent by Uncle Zhong has not arrived for so long. How could the letter sent from Shengjing to Qicame arrive in just a few days? It's a long way from Shengjing to Qicame Mansion. I wrote a letter specifically to tell the other party to bring more umbrellas when it rains. By the time the letter arrived, I was afraid it would have already rained. So. Shen Yu looked at the letter. So this letter may not have come from Beijing, but why did it have to be written in Beijing at the end to wish for peace? These pieces of paper were so well sealed in the leggings that the other party searched for them several times, which already shows the importance of this letter. What information is hidden in it? Shen Yu scanned it again, her eyes stopping on those 2 dates. Making a special trip to write down the date of rain so clearly must be the point. Shen Yu walked to the study, copied down the 2 dates and locations, put the letters away and shouted, "Green medicine." Lu Yao responded, "Sir. Find me a calendar, one from 3 years ago." Lu Yao didn't know why, but what the lady ordered must be important. He ran away and came back again, putting all the calendars of the past 10 years on the table. "I asked for it from Uncle Zhong, and Uncle Zhong is so enthusiastic." Shen Yu didn't respond and opened the calendar, but she couldn't tell the reason based on the date alone. While he was distressed, Arya brought tea into the room, put it on the table, stretched his neck, took a look and said, "I know this one." "Do you know him?" Shen Yu asked in surprise. Arya nodded obediently. "I know you." She pointed to the words above and said, "What year, month, day, and I am literate. I know all these words." Shen Yu almost fell down, touched Arya's head and said, "It's the 23rd day of the lunar month. From now on, let Lu Yao teach you how to read." Arya nodded happily, pointed to a few other words and asked, "Where are these?" She couldn't figure it out anyway, so Shen Yu simply sat down and taught Arya how to read, June of the 15th year of Tongxiu. Arya thought for a while, and her face slowly fell. "What's wrong?" Shen Yu asked, tilting her head. Arya lowered her head and said, "I remember this day. My parents died at the end of June in the 15th year of Tongxiu's reign." Shen Yu stroked Arya's hair lovingly, and Arya wiped her tears and said, "Originally, we said we would come to provide disaster relief at the end of June. My parents and I have been looking forward to it for a long time." Lu Yao also sat down, leaned on the table and asked, "Isn't there a disaster relief? Then your parents all starved to death." After asking, I realized that I was exposing someone's scars, and I quickly covered my mouth. I asked casually, "And you don't have to answer." But Arya nodded and shed tears and said, "There is disaster relief, but the food provided is not enough. A family of 3 only has 1 bowl of porridge, which is not enough for 1 person. My parents all ate it for me, and then they..." Arya pursed her lips and wanted to cry. The green medicine touched Arya's sore spot, and he quickly gave her a snack. "Look, you don't need anything now, and the master treats you well. Your parents will be very happy to know this." Arya took the snack and nodded. "What happened next?" Liu Yao asked, holding his chin. "Later, Mr. Liu, who is a businessman, came to provide relief and gave a lot of food." Lu Yao and Shen Yu looked at each other. Arya continued, "I heard people say that Shengjing is very good, everyone can have enough to eat, so I went to Beijing with the refugees. I was too young and no one bought me, so I couldn't get food. But I was lucky, the housekeeper look at my pity and take me in. 3 years ago, Arya was only 8 years old. It was rare for her to go to Beijing alone to survive. It's so pitiful. Lu Yao sighed and looked at Shen Yu. That's right, sir. Shen Yu frowned in thought and murmured, Lu's disaster relief. She suddenly asked, is your hometown in Yong'an? Arya's eyes lit up, Master, how do you know? Of course Shen Yu knew that there was a drought in Yongshan that year, no crops were harvested, and there were many refugees. The food and salary provided by the court for disaster relief was a drop in the bucket, and many places began to exchange their children for food. Yong'an Yong'an, what an ironic name. Shen Yu also heard the news at the border at that time. The reason why the Lu family is so big is because it has a good reputation. It helps the poor every year and gives alms every year. It was the same in the 15th year of Tongxiu. Shen Yu remembered that year she wrote a letter begging her grandmother to use her pocket money to buy food for the victims. Shen Yu wrote the word Yong'an on the paper, right next to the word Kikang. Looking at the two place names side by side, Shen Yu suddenly frowned and said, LV Yao, bring me the map. The green medicine moved in response to the sound, and there was a map in the study, which was turned out and spread on the table. Moment. Shen Yu rolled up the map, picked up the piece of paper with the date and place name on it, and said, I'm going out for a trip. If anyone asks, just tell me that I have something to do and come back before the curfew. Pei Chunli took advantage of Marquis Xianping and found a casual position in the court. I don't know what evil accusations Xie Tingzhou made against Pei Chunli's father. He has been detained in Suanping Hao's mansion these days and cannot leave. He was not even allowed to go to the palace banquet. Pei Chunli had just been released from the ban today, and he looked quite presentable in his official robe, as if it were something like that. The sedan entered the Guanghua gate, but instead of going to the Zhenfu division where he worked, it went straight to the Ministry of Household Affairs. After entering the household department, Pei Chunli sat down with a golden sword on his horse and said, Where is your minister? The clerk hurriedly served tea. Little Marquis, Mr. Zhang hasn't come back yet. Do you have anything to do with us? Pei Chunli glanced at him sideways. Of course there's something going on, otherwise you think I, the young Marquis, have come to your household department to have some tea because I've run out of tea. The young official smiled and bowed. Young lord, you are joking. The tea in the Hubu department is vulgar. It is not worth the trip in person. However, it will take a while for Mr. Zhang to come back. It won't be a problem. Pei Chunli thought to himself, what he wanted was Zhang Lianzi's absence, otherwise how could anything happen? I'll just wait here. You serve me a plate of melon seeds. If there are no melon seeds, just peanuts. Oh, by the way, there are also my two followers. You can find a place for them to rest. The clerk cupped his hands and said, This is natural, you two come with me. The young Marquis personally gave the order, and the junior official did not dare to neglect. He brought the two attendants into the inner room where the junior official was resting, served tea, and then left. Someone poked a hole in the window paper. Shen Yu, dressed like a follower, pressed against the window to observe the situation outside. She had observed carefully when she just came in. There was another door on the southeast side leading to the inner office. The rooms where the officials of the Ministry of Household Affairs and the duty rooms should be located inside. When there was no one outside the house, she ducked out and climbed up to the roof with a slight climb. The door on the east side was guarded, so she could only walk from the sky if she couldn't walk by the right way. After several attempts to break through walls, she had a pretty good grasp of all the connections. She managed to sneak into the inner hall with ease, but it still took her some time to find the warehouse. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 133. Zhang Lianzi went into the palace to discuss matters. As soon as he came back and entered the yamen, a minor official came to report that the young Marquis of Xianping Marquis had something to do with him. "How long have you been here?" The clerk replied, "It didn't take long, but I have drank 5 cups of tea and eaten 3 plates of melon seeds. It seems that I am not ready to leave until I wait for the adults." Zhang Lianzi waved the clerk to step aside. When he entered, Pei Chunli crossed his legs and lay on his back in a chair, falling into a deep sleep. Melon seed shells were scattered all over the ground, and Pei Chunli still had a handful in his hand. The clerk was about to call someone, but Zhang Lianzi raised his hand to stop him. After walking out the door, he asked, "He came alone?" The clerk said, "That's not true, there are 2 more followers, I have arranged them." Before he could finish speaking, Zhang Lianzi strode away and kicked the door open. The entourage inside was startled. Zhang Lianzi stood at the door. "Is there anyone else?" The attendant said, "Come back to me, sir, I'm going to the toilet." Zhang Lianzi sneered, it was just as he guessed. He and Pei Chunli had no intersection. A young prince who only knew how to eat, drink and have fun suddenly came to the Ministry of Household Affairs to look for him, either committing adultery or stealing. "Have people guard all the doors and don't let anyone out," Zhang Lianzi ordered as he walked into the inner office. When Shen Yu entered the warehouse, she felt that this trip was probably in vain. The bookshelves in the warehouse are as far as the eye can see. They are 3 meters high and have more than 10 floors. If just one shelf of books falls, it can kill someone. It is too difficult to find clues in this vast ocean. The bookshelf is marked by the zodiac signs, rather than by category and year, probably to prevent anyone from coming in and browsing. With the thought that it was time to come, Shen Yu found a shelf at random, took out a book, opened it, glanced at it, and stuffed it back. In fact, if you read a few more books, you will be able to find clues. They are not disorganized but divided into categories. In this case, you can always find them if you search one by one, but it just takes time. I hope Pei Chunli can be more vigilant. It would be nice if Zhang Lianzi could hold him back for a while when he came back. As time passed, Shen Yu held a book and flipped through it. She finally found this book, which happened to be the 15th year of Tongxiu. Shen Yu looked through it, but couldn't find the information she wanted. Just as she was about to get a copy, a familiar voice sounded behind her. "You can't find it?" Shen Yu's hair suddenly stood up. Zhang Lianzi. When did he come? Why didn't she notice? Shen Yu didn't move and heard footsteps approaching slowly. Zhang Lianzi approached and said, "I might as well tell you that when Ji Liangji was the minister of the Ministry of Revenue, the account book of the Ministry of Revenue was divided into 2 volumes, the real one and the false one. One is for people to see, and the other is for ghosts to see. What's the point? You are so smart, you should know what is true and what is false." The footsteps stopped behind her, and it seemed that Zhang Lianzi already knew who she was. Shen Yu gritted her teeth and struck with her arm at a tricky angle. Zhang Lianzi's back hit the bookshelf with a bang. The guard outside the door asked, "Sir, is it?" "It's okay, something was overturned," Zhang Lianzi said loudly. After saying that, he looked at Shen Yu and said, "Look, I won't harm you." Shen Yu pulled her fingers away, and Zhang Lianzi suddenly had difficulty breathing, but he didn't frown. "What are you looking for?" "Something about Yan Liang Pass." Shen Yu frowned, and the force on her hand became a little stronger. Zhang Lianzi finally closed his eyes in pain, but there was no intention of resisting. He has been called a child prodigy since he was a child, and his mind is incomparable to others. He felt that there was something wrong with Pei Chunli last time at the tea house. He had heard a little bit about Pei Chunli climbing to the corner of Bailin Palace. Plus Shen Yu was in Bailin Palace. He quickly connected the whole line, so he went straight to the warehouse. "Where are the true and false account books you mentioned?" Shen Yu asked coldly, her hands loosening slightly. Zhang Lianzi finally took a breath. Tell me first, what do you want to do incognito? Shen Yu didn't answer. Zhang Lianzi thought to himself, I know even if you don't tell me. You want to find out the truth and avenge your father, right? He picked up the account book that Shen Yu had just taken, took a look at it and said, June of the 15th year of Tongxiu, it seems that you have learned something about it. He seemed to know what he meant. Shen Yu grabbed the account book and said, you are an insider. Zhang Lianzi shook his head, I'm not afraid of your jokes. Ji Liangji manages the household department very well. It took me 3 years in the household department to get anything done. Shen Yu didn't believe him, and Zhang Lianzi knew it. I know you don't believe me, but I won't hurt you. You should believe that you are following Xie Tingzhou to use him to find out the truth. Zhang Lianzi looked at her, I can do that too. If you want to check the account books, I'm the closest way. As long as you. With a small snap, Zhang Lianzi's chin touched a sharp dagger. I can still make you speak in other ways, Shen Yu said coldly. Zhang Lianzi was forced to raise his head and chuckled softly when he heard this. How about we make a deal? I don't make deals. Then I can only lay the bait. It's up to you whether you bite the hook or not. Shen Yu frowned and took back the dagger, say. Zhang Lianzi wiped his chin, there was some blood on his fingertips. First tell me where you found it. Seeing that Shen Yu didn't speak, Zhang Lianzi nodded slightly, then let me say it. Ji Liangji has been executed and I took over the household department. Do you know why the suppression of bandits has been delayed until now? He solemnly said, because the Ministry of Revenue is an extremely bad mess. The march needs food and wages. The national treasury is in short supply. The Ministry of Revenue cannot allocate money, so naturally it is delayed again and again. Shen Yu said in a deep voice, Ji Liangji has embezzled so much money. Isn't it enough to confiscate his house and put it into the national treasury? 5,804,000 taels, Zhang Lianzi said, this is the amount of money that Geg embezzled in the book. How much do you think was confiscated? Zhang Lianzi said to himself before she could say anything, less than 100,000 taels. Shen Yu's eyebrows immediately wrinkled. There is too much discrepancy here. Zhang Lianzi said, even if it is extravagant, it will not be so different. Then guess again, where did the remaining 5 million plus taels of silver go? Shen Yu clenched the account book in her hand. Zhang Lianzi glanced at the account book in her hand. As if he was really baiting Shen Yu, he asked another question. In the 15th year of Tongxiu, there was a drought in Yong'an counties. The Ministry of Household Affairs allocated 300,000 taels of silver and 80,000 shi of grain to Yong'an for disaster relief. Later, the disaster was brought under control, and the officials who went to provide disaster relief were promoted and are now counselors of the Xianzheng department. Zhang Lianzi turned around and looked at her, I know far more than Xie Tingzhou. Can you bite such a bait? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 134. Shen Yu's eyes fell on Zhang Lianzi's face, and for a moment, she smiled. Keep your fake account book, I'm too lazy to bite this broken bait. Zhang Lianzi's pupils shrank and he said without changing his expression, how do you know that I don't have a real account book in my hand? Shen Yu threw the booklet in her hand on the shelf and said, there is no need to test me. Since you don't have it, I'll take my leave, Mr. Zhang. Do you think you can leave? Zhang Lianzi stopped in front of her calmly. Shen Yu raised her chin slightly, you should ask yourself, can you stop me? Zhang Lianzi lowered his eyes and saw the red mark on her neck. He was a man, how could he not understand what it was and how it was caused? Anger and jealousy surged up. Zhang Linzi narrowed his eyes and stared at her neck for a moment. I really can't stop you, and the guards outside are probably no match for you, so go ahead and I'll take you out. Shen Yu looked suspicious. Zhang Lianzi fell into Zhang Lianzi's trap last time. Who knows if he has any tricks up his sleeve this time. Zhang Lianzi turned his face away, half of it hidden in the dark, cold, and gloomy. He took a few steps. Wait, Shen Yu stopped him. Zhang Lianzi turned around and was about to speak when something flashed in front of his eyes, flew into his mouth and slid down his throat. Zhang Lianzi covered his throat. What did you feed me? Just make sure you don't cheat. Minister Zhang is very scheming. He got into your trap last time, so I have to strike first this time. Don't worry, I will give you the antidote when you leave the Guanghua gate. Hearing this, Zhang Lianzi's brows relaxed. I said I won't harm you. Last time, it was within my control. Now it's different in the household department. You don't have to be so vigilant. He turned to leave, then stopped halfway behind him. How about we make a bet to see who can find the ledger first? What's in it for me? Zhang Lianzi said, the advantage is that if I find the account book, you can exchange it with something. Shen Yu sneered and did not answer the question. Lead the way, Mr. Zhang. The two of them walked out of the door one after another. The guard at the door was stunned for a moment. It seemed that he didn't see anyone else going in, but he didn't dare to speak out, fearing that he had neglected his duty and missed it. Shen Yu returned to the front hall, where Pei Chunli was half lying on a chair, sleeping loudly. Little Marquis, it's time to go back. Pei Chunli purred in response to her. Shen Yu was speechless for a while, then raised her foot to kick his leg. Pei Chunli was frightened and fell to the ground, causing the melon seed shells to crackle on the ground. Pei Chunli sat on the ground and wiped his mouth in a daze. He raised his eyes and saw Shen Yu. Is it okay now? Shen Yu nodded. The clerk helped Pei Chunli get up. Why did the young Marquis fall asleep? Isn't this boring? Where are you adults? The clerk replied, Your Excellency is out here giving orders. I asked the humble official to send the young Marquis out. Pei Chunli stood up, shook his clothes, and said to Shen Yu in a pretentious manner, Let's go, take this young prince back to his house. When the group of people went out, Zhang Lianzi was at the door of the house. Pei Chunli made some pretentious greetings and then got on the sedan again. Shen Yu turned back in front of the door. Before she could speak, Zhang Lianzi said, No need, it's not poisonous. Shen Yu pursed her lips, turned around and followed the sedan. After leaving the Guanghua gate, Pei Chunli opened the curtain and poked her head out. What did he say? It's not poisonous? Shen Yu, the tea you drink and the melon seeds you eat are not poisonous. Pei Chunli was a fool and believed everything he said. He nodded and then lay on the sedan window and chatted with Shen Yu. How is it? Am I particularly reliable in doing things? I can hold Zhang Lianzi down just by sleeping. Shen Yu glanced at him and didn't even bother to talk to him. The warmer it gets, the later it gets dark. It was just getting dark after eating and drinking with Pei Chunli. Today Pei Chunli took her to the flower house to drink wine and listen to music. Shen Yu was the one who paid the bill. She couldn't let anyone work for her all afternoon. The white feathers under the eaves were motionless, probably because they were tired from flying today, and they only glanced at people when they entered the hospital. Is His Highness back? Shen Yu stepped into the hospital. Kono said, I'm back, but... Shen Yu didn't hear the sound, but walked straight to the bedroom, raised her hand and knocked on the door. Your Highness, it's me. There was no movement in the room for a long time, and just as he was about to knock again, the side door opened with a creak. Shen Yu turned around and looked. There was no light in the room, and Xie Tingzhou stood at the door, his hands just hanging down from the door. Came back. Shen Yu nodded and said happily, I have gained a little bit today. She didn't see Xieting's face clearly, but she seemed to hear him laughing very softly. Come over. Shen Yu walked over, and as the distance got closer, she gradually saw Xieting Zhou clearly. He must have just finished bathing, or was disturbed in the middle of bathing. He was only wearing a large robe, tied loosely with a belt, and his clothes were half open, revealing a small piece of his strong chest. Shen Yu stopped suddenly. How about I? Come here, Xieting Zhou interrupted her. She bit the soft meat in her mouth, walked over slowly, and stopped at the door. I'll come over later. As soon as she finished speaking, Xieting Zhou grabbed her wrist and pulled her in. The door closed with a clang, and Shen Yu pressed her back against the door, fearing that if she moved forward even an inch, she would be pressed against his body. Xieting Zhou slowly lowered his head and approached little by little. The tip of his nose brushed her cheek and asked, "Did you drink outside?" Shen Yu softly said and said honestly, "I asked Pei Chunli for help, so I invited him to have a few drinks. Why don't you invite me? You're not here." Xieting's body was still moist, and water droplets were still sliding down his neck. Shen Yu looked away, but he pinched his chin and pulled her back. "It's too late to please." He put his lips to hers, and the tip of his tongue poked out the teeth and penetrated, not as harshly as yesterday, but just searching around in her mouth. After pulling away, he seemed to still have some lingering thoughts and smacked his lips. "It's Ruoxiakun." Shen Yu raised her head and said in surprise, "You can also taste it." A sly smile flashed in Xieting's eyes. He straightened up and walked behind the screen. "What's your gain today?" He had already finished bathing, but what was interrupted was another unfinished matter, but now that she was here, it was impossible for him to continue. Shen Yu found Huajhizi and lit the lamp. "I went to the Ministry of Household Affairs today." Xieting Zhou stopped dressing and asked sideways, "Did you ask Pei Chunli to take you there?" You're too ridiculous," Xieting Zhou scolded, looking at the figure reflected on the screen and said, "What if someone discovers you, or Zhonglianzi directly orders you to be arrested?" Shen Yu knew that she had caused trouble the last time she entered the palace, causing Xieting Zhou to be reprimanded and grounded. In fact, before going out today, she had thought that there were no experts in the household department to catch her. Moreover, she was wary of Zhonglianzi and would not fall into his trap as easily as last time. "I'm sure this time, and I'm coming back well, haven't I?" Shen Yu said. Xieting Zhou remained silent for a long time behind the screen, and no one came out. Shen Yu tried and said, "You are angry." "Shouldn't I be angry?" Xieting Zhou asked. "If you had your own safety at heart, you wouldn't do such a risky thing." "That's how I am." Shen Yu was not happy either. "If, like you said, you have to be absolutely sure before you can act, then I wouldn't have embarked on this path in the first place." It was quiet again behind the screen, so quiet that it was annoying. Shen Yu bit her lower lip and waited for a moment, then turned and walked towards the door. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 135. There were footsteps behind her. As soon as Shen Yu opened the door, a big hand pressed on the door and closed it again with a snap. Shen Yu pulled again, but was pushed back by Xieting Zhou. "Turn around," Xieting Zhou said. Shen Yu turned a deaf ear, thinking that just now they were hugging and kissing again, and then he turned around and started scolding people, which made her feel unhappy. Xieting Zhou sighed, lowered his head and leaned against her ear and said, "Why are you so grand?" Shen Yu felt that she should have a good argument with him, so she turned around and Xieting Zhou leaned back, almost hitting her nose. Shen Yu looked at him and said angrily, "If you regard me as your personal guard, then I can train you as you wish." Xieting Zhou seemed to understand why she was upset, and asked in a low voice, "Then who do you think I should treat you as mine?" Shen Yu opened her mouth to speak, but felt ashamed to speak, so she stared at him hatefully without blinking. Seeing that she was holding back her words, Xietingzhou was afraid of making her angry, so he took her into his arms and said close to her ear, "I treat you like a treasure, like pearls and jade. I protect you every day for fear of getting bruised. I touched it, but you didn't care, risked yourself, and always stabbed me in the heart." He accommodated her height and lowered his body slightly. Shen Yu's chin rested on his shoulder, and she didn't know how to react. He was the one who was thinking about how to get angry, but now he is the one who feels wronged. Xietingzhou stroked her hair and said warmly, "Auntie, this is the first time in my life that I'm in love. I don't know how to deal with it. If you feel bad, you can teach me." Shen Yu softened, and after reading the last few words he said, she suddenly felt something was wrong. She raised her head and said, "This is the first time in my life, how can I teach you?" That episode in her previous life was so messed up that she even dreamed of digging up those memories, let alone recalling them. Xietingzhou's laughter rang in my ears. "What should we do?" "Well, why don't I go find someone to learn from you first and then come back to teach you?" Shen Yu deliberately angered him. "How dare you?" After Xietingzhou finished speaking, he felt that his tone was too strong, and suddenly said, "You deliberately poked my heart again, that's all. I can't escape your control, so I can only let you bully me like this." Shen Yu laughed and said, "Stop pretending to be pitiful and let me go first." Xietingzhou loosened her a little, but didn't completely let go of her. "We have to hold her for a while longer. Kang is in the yard today. It won't hurt anyone if you have my scent on you." "Do you think I'm stupid?" Shen Yu said, "then the guards in your courtyard, as well as Zifeng and Changliu, are all because of you hugging Lu so much." Xietingzhou was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and fell into the crook of her neck, laughing so hard that his shoulders shrugged lightly. "I don't have a habit of cutting off my sleeves, so why don't you expose it and save some face for me? Why should I find a reason to hug you? Not easy." Shen Yu also curved her lips and smiled, squeezed her hands, and tentatively put her arms around his back. "Well, I can only hold him for a while. I have something important to talk to you about. When the bathroom gets cold, it starts to get damp." The two returned to the bedroom, and Xietingzhou called for dinner. He came back late and had not had time to have dinner. Shen Yu was quite full after eating in the evening, so she took a small taste of the side dishes with her chopsticks. Zhang Lianzi said that the Ministry of Accounts has both true and false account books. Most of the false accounts are not in his hands. I remembered that Ge Liangji once said that he left a life-saving talisman for his children. The life-saving talisman should be the account book. Xietingzhou picked up the vegetables. It should be true that he holds the lifeblood of many people in his hands and would not touch them easily. Shen Yu said, "Ge Liangji has a total of 7 children, born to his wife and 3 concubines. I checked and found that the female family members have been working as prostitutes in the Jiaofang. The rest are in the Ministry of Punishment and are only waiting to be exiled in March. I just don't know who owns the account book. This must have been planned by Ge Liangji." She frowned. "They won't take out such a life-saving charm easily. They have to find a way." "Don't worry yet." Xietingzhou picked a piece of bamboo shoots into her bowl. The bamboo shoots in the season are tender and fragrant. Xietingzhou has seen her use her chopsticks several times. It's easier to deal with the official prostitute. I'll go to the Jiaofang division to touch her some other time. The bamboo shoots on Shen Yu's chopsticks fell off, and she raised her eyelids. "Who do you want to touch in Jiaofangsi?" Xietingzhou said helplessly, "Find out the truth." Shen Yu simply put down her chopsticks and said, "You are different now from before." Xietingzhou asked with a smile, "Why is it different?" Shen Yu pursed her lips. "It's just, you can't go in and out of the brothel at will like before. You should keep yourself clean. There are places like Jiaofangsi. You can't go there even if you have nothing to do. Across the candlelight, Xie frowned and said, "Okay." He was so straightforward, which made Shen Yu feel a little embarrassed. She turned sideways and said, "I'm not an unreasonable person. If it's business, of course." Xie interrupted her and held her hand across the table. "Do you have any other requests?" Shen Yu was stunned for a long time before saying, "No. I have one," Xie said warmly. "What?" "Move here." Shen Yu's face suddenly turned red and she was a little flustered. This was too fast. The two of them just broke through the window paper yesterday, and asked her to move it here today. She has been walking around the world for many years, and she is not as coy and polite as the young lady in the boudoir, but she cannot become like this no matter how fast she is. Just by looking at her expression, Xie knew that she had probably misunderstood, and explained, "The courtyard of Kingpu residence is big enough, with more than a dozen rooms, you can choose as you like." "I'll think about it," Shen Yu said with a red face. Shen Yu hasn't moved out from Lu Mingxian yet. Just because Uncle Zhong took this matter very seriously, he originally thought that he and his son lived in the same house, but unexpectedly they lived in separate rooms. Uncle Zhong had no choice but to call for help to repair the other vacant rooms and select some more. The furniture and furnishings have been prepared in the past few days so that the future crown princess can move here. Spring rain is as precious as oil. It has rained several times in succession in the past few days, and various places have to start preparing for spring plowing. In the morning, Xie went to the check-in room for the first time. When he came back, he called Shen Yu into the room. The suppression of bandits has been implemented, and an order should be issued in the next 2 days. "Who to send?" Shen Yu asked. Xie said, "Wen Leshan is the nephew of Wen Hongyuan, Minister of the Ministry of War. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi." Chapter 137. "Are you going to Jiaofangxi?" Shen Yu raised her eyebrows. "Jiaofangxi is not a serious place. How can any serious person go to Jiaofangxi to discuss matters?" Jiaofangxi sounded serious. In the early days, it was indeed an elegant place for producing poetry and other elegant music. Now, it is just a brothel covered with an official code, for the princes and nobles to pass the time. "Listen to what I have to say," Xie laughed. "The little prince of Prince Kong's palace invited me to go. Aren't Ji Liangji's female relatives all in the Jiaofang division? I just want to go and have a look. Prince Kong is the younger brother of the current emperor, the 7th son of the late emperor, and the little prince is also the nephew of Emperor Tongxiu. You're still grounded? Didn't you go out a few times?" Shen Yu pursed her lips. "Then I'll go too." "You don't trust me," Xie laughed. Shen Yu said, "You go and talk things over, and I'll go find Ji Liangji's daughter." "No. It's not unreasonable for Xie to be worried. There are many people in the Jiaofang department, so it's hard to guarantee that no one is keeping an eye on Ji Liangji's female family members. If Shen Yu is involved, he's afraid that he won't be able to protect her." Shen Yu said angrily, "I'm not on duty tomorrow. It's my own time. You can't control me. Do you want to force your way into the Jiaofang department?" Xie asked, "or at night? Or," his voice deepened, "go to pay Chunli again to take you in, right?" Shen Yu was about to speak. Xie blocked her path directly. "If he dares to take you on adventure again, I will break his legs. He is the young Marquis." Shen Yu raised her voice. "What's wrong with the little Marquis?" Xie raised his cold eyelids slightly. "The emperor's son can also be beaten without fail." Shen Yu pointed her index finger at him. You are so lawless." Xie smiled and held her fingertips. "I can't take risks. Everything else is up to you." Shen Yu quickly took it back, feeling that this attitude was still not enough, so she turned sideways and gave him a side look. You are too domineering. Anyway, leave this matter to me. Xie Zhou poured her another cup of tea. Some things can't be rushed. It's better to be safe. It seemed that he had made up his mind not to let her go. Shen Yu glanced at him secretly. After thinking for a while, she sat upright again, holding a cup of tea and drinking it, and raised her eyelids to look at him. But I want to go. Wouldn't it be safe if you take me with you? I can dress up as a man and paint my face black or paint scars. Xie Zhou looked at her with a pitiful look in his eyes, and his voice was low, as if he had been wronged a lot. He eats this, but not at this time. Thinking he was speechless, Xie Zhou opened his mouth and closed it again, avoiding her eyes. Anyway, this matter is not negotiable. Shen Yu stood up for a moment, looking as pitiful as before. What are you going for? Xie Zhou asked. Go back to sleep. After saying that, Shen Yu raised her feet and walked out the door. Even though she was walking far away, she could still hear her deliberately heavy steps. Xie Zhou listened to the sound gradually disappearing, smiled helplessly and shook his head. Chang Liu was sitting under the tree playing with his turtle. When he heard the sound, he looked over and saw an angry figure. He opened his mouth and silently asked Zai Feng, "Are you having a fight?" 11 Feng glanced at him and heard Xie Zhou calling his name in the room, and hurried in. Your Highness. Shijie won't be on duty tomorrow, so give her a change. 11 Feng responded and heard Xie Zhou say, find someone to keep an eye on her. Don't let her step out of the palace tomorrow. Xie Zhou turned his eyes and saw a head lying on the window. Come in. Chang Liu chuckled, opened the window and jumped in. Your Highness. It's up to you, Xie Zhou said. If she goes out tomorrow, I will stop your pocket money for half a year. Staying for a long time was like a bolt from the blue. How can I buy delicious food for my little turtle without pocket money? Then keep an eye on her and don't let her leave your side for even a step, Xie Zhou said. The long-lasting kung fu is not very good, but the light kung fu is good. Chasing and escaping are excellent, and the stalking kung fu is also good. Chang Liu looked sad and muttered, I still want to save 2 months to build a wedding bed for them so that they can get married. Zai Feng closed his eyes, feeling that he was really blind, and couldn't help but said, your 2 turtles are both male, how can we get married? Why not? Chang Liu said innocently, then your Highness and Shijie, aren't they also male? There was sudden silence in the room. Chang Liu slowed down, reacted immediately, and ran away with his feet still on the spot, his voice still lingering on the spot. I'll definitely be optimistic about Shijie tomorrow. Xie Zhou held his forehead and pressed his breath. I asked you to teach him more. What did you teach him? 11 Feng was very troubled. It was obvious that this was not taught by him, but by following his Highness. But isn't the purpose of the guards just to share the worries of the master? This is not the first time that I have taken the blame. Practice makes perfect, 11 Feng said, I will teach you well later. The curfew in Shengjing has not yet been lifted, and no one is allowed to walk on the streets at night. But the Qingluchuguan and the Jiao Fangxi in Shengjing were still very lively, and the sound of silk and bamboo could be faintly heard for half the street. A dark shadow flashed across the roof and disappeared into the night in a blink of an eye. Shen Yu jumped into the room and gently closed the window. The room was brightly lit, but there was not a single soul in sight. This was the case with Jiaofang's eye. Even in an empty room, lights had to be lit to create a lively scene. She came late tonight, and Chang Liu was really pestering her, crying, making trouble, and hanging herself. She said that if she went out, the little turtle would starve to death. If the turtle starved to death, he would also die. If he died, both Zifeng and Uncle Zhong would be heartbroken. He gave her a high hat and said that 5 lives were in her hands, and asked she couldn't bear it. In the end, she was allowed to run out, and 2 pieces of snack medicine were taken care of. It was simple, crude, and easy to use. There are people coming and going outside the room. Jiao Fangxi is not an ordinary brothel. The guests coming and going are all familiar faces. Someone will definitely notice her as an unfamiliar face. But the situation is different for women. A new group of official prostitutes have been introduced, and their faces may not even be familiar to them yet. After a while, Shen Yu looked at herself with her hands on her hips and felt a little embarrassed about her outfit. It's been a long time since I've worn women's clothing, and besides, I'm still wearing gauze, so I'm afraid it will tear if I move too much. Shen Yu gritted her teeth, opened the door, and stepped out with a small step. Jiao Fangxi is divided into front and backyards, and the backyard faces the waterside pavilion. It is the most noble area in Jiao Fangxi, and no one can enter it. The room was filled with silk and bamboo, and bursts of laughter occasionally. Xie Tingzhou leaned on the soft pillow, leaning on his elbows, holding the folding fan in one hand and beating time. He really looked like a swinger. The prostitute was sitting on her knees on the hut, with no shoes or stockings on her feet, only a bunch of bells hanging on them. "Your Highness, I'll give you some wine." Xie Tingzhou slowly opened his eyes, raised his glass to drink, but slightly raised his eyes to look at the prostitute. As if he was in a mood, Xie Tingzhou put down the cup, picked up the prostitute's chin with a folding fan, and raised it. "New here." The young prince's name was Li Chang. He smiled knowingly and said, "I know you are picky, so of course what I want today is fresh and clean." "What is it called?" The prostitute only glanced up and then lowered her eyes, feeling that it would be blasphemous to look at her features anymore. "My name is Fuying," the prostitute whispered softly. "Fuying." Xie Tingzhou read it again, "It sounds like a romantic name. What was it originally? What is it called?" Fuying said softly, "I forgot." Xie Tingzhou glanced in surprise. Fuying explained, "Now that the place has been changed, there is a new life. The bird falls into the mortal world, the past is gone, and the slave family has forgotten it. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 138. Li Chang smiled while stroking his palms. The official family members who were betrothed are just different. Their talents are incomparable to those of ordinary brothel girls. Xie Tingzhou smiled and said thoughtfully, "The new arrivals, official family members, must have been convicted of the Yanliang Pass incident." Fuying immediately lowered his eyes. Xie Tingzhou put down his fan and said, "Ji Liangji has given birth to a daughter as beautiful as a flower." "If Tingzhou likes it," Li Chang said with a smile, "why don't you be the first flower picker?" "Thank you." Tingzhou but smiled and said nothing. Shen Yu walked around the main building. The advantage of women's clothing is that she can move around the temple without any obstruction, and she doesn't look weird even if she is wearing a veil. Others just think it's a coquettish thing. Shen Yu inquired about Ji Liangji's two daughters in advance. After entering the Jiaofang division, they both changed their names. One was named Fuying and the other was named Fueyao. It's just that the Jiao Fangxi is quite big, and there are hundreds of maids and prostitutes coming and going, so it's really hard to find this person. Shen Yu went up to the second floor, grabbed a passing maid and asked, "Where has Fuying gone? She asked me to deliver something to her, but why is there no one there?" The maid was stunned for a moment. "Fuying has gone to Liubei Pavilion to serve the nobleman." "Sister, you are asking about Fueyao, right?" "Ah, yes." Shen Yu quickly changed her words, "The sisters just came here not long ago, and their names are so similar, I always remember them wrong." "It's the same. Many people remember wrongly." "Fueyao is in that room." The maid pointed to the end of the corridor with a smile. Shen Yu thanked the maid and walked along the corridor to the other end. The Jiao Fangxi was bustling with activity, and the sound of orchestral strings and bamboos could be heard endlessly. In the middle of the round hall, there was a dancer standing on a drum and dancing. There were several rooms in the corridor, and there were 3 side by side in the corner that the maid pointed to just now. When she walked to the first room, a maid happened to come out. Shen Yu glanced inside and saw several prostitutes in the room leaning on the noble lady and smiling sweetly. She had never seen Ji Liangji's daughter, but she immediately determined that there was no support here. The female family members who have just been convicted have all fallen into the quagmire from noble daughters. The pride in their bodies has not been worn away. Those who have not suffered a few years in the Jiaofang division cannot behave like this. In the second room, the noise inside became even louder. Brother Wen is going to send troops to suppress the bandits in 2 days. This time, we will be on the rise. Don't forget us friends when we come back. Easy to say, easy to talk about. They are all doing errands for the emperor. There is no such thing as a clear cloud. Shen Yu listened to a few words and thought that this must be Wen Leshan, the nephew of Wen Hongyuan, the minister of war. There were people coming and going on the corridor, and it was inconvenient for her to stand here for a long time, so she ducked into the vacant room next door. The conversation continued next door, and she heard Do Qing's voice from inside. Several people praised Wen Leshan for a while, each with a louder tongue than the other. Listening to the conversation, you can tell that they are all unlearned and unskilled. Like snakes and rats, no one dislikes the other for being unlearned. Shen Yu hadn't confirmed where Fu Yao was, and was a little impatient while waiting, but she didn't know what happened next door, and suddenly there was a quarrel. Who do you think you are? Just because you have a cousin who is a minister, you call us brothers. Brothers think highly of you, so don't talk about it. Do Qing blushed. You're so embarrassed to accuse me, why don't you climb on your uncle's trouser leg and rub it up? Others hurriedly came up to persuade, let's have some fun on a good day. You two should calm down. Why are you arguing? Wen Leshan was more calm than Do Qing, and said sarcastically, what can I do? My surname is Wen, but is your surname Zhang? Look where this is. You have no official position, and today I ask you. I came here to drink because I think highly of you, so don't treat yourself like a green onion. He touched Do Qing's sore spot. His mother went to Zhang Mansion again and again, hoping that Zhang Lianzi would find an official position in the court for him. Zhang Lianzi refused to agree even if it was obvious that the matter could be solved just by opening his mouth. The few people in the room have all grown up playing together. Seeing that everyone else has been eating the royal food one after another, he is the only one who has not. He is a lot shorter than others. Do Qing was so angry that he didn't care about anything anymore and began to speak eloquently, then I can't compare to you, Master Wen. Who asked you to pick a good one when you were born? You just picked it from Mrs. Wen's belly. Get out. Wen Hongyuan could not give birth to a son, nor could he support him after he was born, so he had high hopes for this nephew. It was rumored that Wen Hongyuan actually gave birth to a son through surrogacy in order to save seeds, and the second wife Wen gave birth to a son who was actually Uncle Wen's son. Do Qing really dared to say anything when he was angry. He could only talk secretly behind his back. He actually dared to say it in front of Wen Lixhang because he was drunk too much. There was only a sound of tables and chairs being overturned. Wen Leshan suddenly pulled out the knife, and others quickly held it down. You can't use it. You can't use the knife. You can't hurt the feelings of brothers. Who is his brother? Wen Lixhang and Do Qing said in unison. Do Qing put his hands on his hips and straightened his neck. You let him come, I want to see if he, a weakling, dares to chop me. Wen Lixhang glanced at the knife in his hand, but he was afraid of causing death, so he threw it away and rushed towards Do Qing with his bare hands, and the two of them immediately struggled. During this period, in addition to the sound of urging people to fight, there were also the screams of prostitutes. Wen Leshan had practiced martial arts, but Do Qing, who was so empty-handed, was no match for him. Wen Leshan pushed him to the ground and was beaten several times. The others called the servant in, and finally managed to pull the two apart, and they persuaded each other separately for a while. Wen Lixhang felt relieved after beating someone, but Do Qing was angry after being beaten. "Brother Do, don't be angry. It's not easy to come here. Didn't you say that Miss Fueo is pretty when you came in? Come on, Fueo. You can help Master Do to rest next door and give him some medicine." Shen Yu was glad that she didn't leave in a hurry. Fueo was indeed next door. Do Qing must have drunk a lot, and he came with staggering footsteps. Shen Yu hurriedly hid behind the bed curtain. She could vaguely see the two people entering the room through the heavy gauze curtain against the wall. Do Qing walked in and sat down on the low couch, crossed his legs and said, "Take it off for me." Fu Yao knelt down, quietly took off his shoes for him, stood up to get the medicine, but was pulled back by Do Qing. "Don't run away, beauty." She helped Yao fall onto his lap and pushed her around in panic. "Mr. Do, don't do this." Fueo broke free from his hand and hurriedly moved behind the table to avoid it. The place where Do Qing was beaten just now was hurt by her push, and the evil fire came out again. Seeing that Do Qing was avoiding him like a snake and a scorpion, he said viciously, "Even you look down on me. If you don't serve me, who do you want to serve?" As he spoke, he took out the riding crop he carried from his waist and cracked it. The first blow helped Yao escape, but the second blow was not so lucky and hit her arm straight. A blood bead suddenly appeared under the gauze. Do Qing was already like this when it came to sex, so he was even more excited when he heard the screams. He wiped his face, then whipped him again. Shen Yu clenched her hands behind the gauze curtain, her heart wavering between saving or not saving, being exposed or not being exposed. Fueo was originally a delicate young lady who was raised in a boudoir. The biggest injury she suffered in her life was probably when she pricked her hand while doing embroidery. After a few whips, she was forced into a corner. The screams here can also be clearly heard next door. Wen Leshan sneered when he heard this, and raised his voice, "The more useless a man is, the more he likes to take it out on women. What the hell is this?" Do Qing's eyes were bloodshot with excitement at this moment. He didn't want to care about the ridicule next door. He threw the whip away and walked towards Fueo while pulling on his clothes belt. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 139. Fu Yao stood up and ran, rushing to the door only to find that it was locked outside. The darkness of Jiao Fangxi is so dark that no one can imagine. No matter how high you were in the past, after joining Jiao Fangxi, you will only have the skin to save you. It's okay for those who are beautiful and talented, and they will specially serve the more distinguished guests of the waterside pavilion. But for people like Fu Yao, who is not very outstanding in appearance and not outstanding in talent, even if he dies, it is said that he died of illness and was hastily buried. No one would offend the guests for her sake. Fu Yao pressed her back tightly against the door, took out the hairpin and pointed it at Do Qing, crying, "Don't come over, please, ah." Do Qing rushed towards her, and she quickly ducked aside. The two of them chased each other, and Do Qing actually got a kick out of it. Fueo held the hairpin and stepped back, while Do Qing approached step by step with a lewd smile. Shen Yu's eyes became colder and colder. She was not a god and could not judge a person's guilt or innocence, but people like Do Qing would only be a disaster if they remained in the world. After making up her mind, Shen Yu raised her hand, pulled off a bead on the chain, and flicked it with her fingers at the right moment. Do Qing felt a pain in his leg, staggered, and fell on Fueo. There was a muffled sound, and the feeling of the hairpin poking into his body made Fueo push Do Qing away. Doqing seemed unaware and staggered back a few steps before falling to the ground. Doqing did not lose consciousness completely. He lowered his head and glanced at the hairpin on his chest, watching the blood slowly spread on his chest. Fueo was stunned. She opened her mouth to scream, but someone covered her mouth from behind. "Don't make a sound, and don't look back," Shen Yu asked in her ear. "Do you want to live?" Fueo nodded vigorously, tears rolling down from his eyes. If he hadn't wanted to survive, he would have committed suicide when his father was convicted, and how could he have ended up like this? "If you want to survive, just do as I say." Shen Yu waved her sleeves and the lights in the room went out. "Keep shouting, keep running, don't stop." Fueo was stunned for a moment, and then she made up her mind. She couldn't see who the other party was, but she knew intuitively that she was trying to save herself. Screams and the sound of tables and chairs clashing came one after another. Wenlick's hen next door slammed the table hard. "It's so noisy. Do, can you please be quiet?" Amid this voice, Shen Yu stepped forward to check on Doqing. He was not dead and was still breathing. I had been in a daze for a moment, and now I saw a person getting closer and closer to me. I couldn't help but cover my chest and shout, "Come on, someone's here. Isn't Wen Leshan practicing martial arts?" Yes, Doqing was confused by drunkenness and blood loss, and these words seemed to let him grab a life-saving straw. "Wen, brother Wen, help. Killing." The main building exploded with this exclamation. The scream seemed to be contagious and soon spread to the corridor. "Ah, killing people. Dead people." Everyone was rushing towards the main building, but there was a slender figure running in the opposite direction. He jumped out of the window and then nimbly jumped on the roof, heading in the opposite direction. The waterside pavilion on the lakeside behind the main building seems to be isolated from the hustle and bustle. The guards outside Liu Bei Pavilion heard the noise at the other end, and one of them asked, "What's going on over there?" "Whatever, let's just do our own thing." There was no wind in the long night, but the shadows of the trees suddenly moved. The guard was alert. "What? It's probably a bird or a cat. It's all fate. The masters are drinking, listening to music, and hugging beauties inside. Let's enjoy the breeze here. Who told you not to be reincarnated as the Prince of Balin or the Little Prince of the county?" Shen Yu suddenly stopped one step away from the wall. She could have escaped from this place with one jump, so she went back and pretended to keep Xie Zhou from knowing she had been there. But after hearing these words, she suddenly wasn't ready to leave. She listened carefully and saw joyful singing and laughter, and she seemed to hear Xie Zhou laughing twice. Shen Yu gritted her teeth. She was working hard outside, but he, Xie Zhou, was here drinking wine. "I can't bear it, I really can't bear it." The guard stood at the door with his hands folded, but saw a slim and beautiful woman covered with a veil walking towards the side. "It's just that her gait is different from that of Jiao Fangxi's prostitute, and her momentum is like that of a royal wife who has come to catch someone raping her." Before Shen Yu could reach the door, the guard guarding the corridor raised his hand to stop him. "There is no shortage of people to serve here. You can't come in." Shen Yu adjusted her tone and asked dissatisfiedly, "Why can't you come in?" The guard looked her up and down, and thought she was the flower girl who wanted to climb up to the dragon and the phoenix. He lowered his voice and said teasingly, "Anyone who is not sent by the boss can't enter. The characters inside are not something you can climb up. Sister, if you don't dislike it, it's the same with us two brothers." Shen Yu raised her hand and slapped the guard, catching him off guard. Shen Yu sneered, "Only you are worthy." The guard brushed his hand and tried to draw his sword, but was held down by another guard next to him, who gave him a warning look. Shen Yu looked back and saw that a eunuch was already running over from the end of the corridor. It seemed that he was reporting. Shen Yu kept doing nothing and said sternly, "My eldest son is inside, let him come out." The two guards looked at each other. The dignitaries in Shengjing may not necessarily be hugging the same woman today as they will be tomorrow. It seems that they usually favored her, but now they are tired of it, but they are unwilling to accept it. As I said just now, you can't come in without the manager's arrangements, so hurry up and leave. Why are you talking so much nonsense to her? While the two were talking, Shen Yu took advantage of their unpreparedness and suddenly passed through the gap between them. She used some clever force, but seemed to be powerless but knocked the person aside. Shen Yu didn't stop and kicked open the door of the wing. The laughter and the sound of bamboo in the house suddenly stopped, and everyone looked towards the door. How did you guard the door? Li Chang scolded sternly. The guard hurriedly said, this woman rushed in when she came over, and even gave her a small slap in the face to insist on going in. Li Chang turned his eyes and looked at the girl at the door. He was stunned for a moment, and his eyes flashed with surprise. Although he couldn't see the face under the veil, just looking at those eyes, he knew that she was extremely beautiful. He put his hands on his hands and smiled and said, the boss here is too ignorant of the rules. Such a beauty has been hidden until now. Xieting Zhou had no interest in these things at all. He raised his eyes casually and was stunned for a moment. It was the first time he saw her wearing women's clothing. She was draped in a light gauze, with her black hair raised only by a wooden hairpin. Her face was looming under the veil, but her eyebrows were heroic and sharp, with a hint of unhappiness in them. Xieting Zhou thought to himself that someone like this really came here to catch an adulterer. Shen Yu looked at her coldly, and saw a woman kneeling next to Xieting Zhou, holding a wine bottle and looking towards her. The director of the Jiaofang had already rushed over. He glanced at Shen Yu at the door and asked, who are you? Why are you here? Li Chang asked doubtfully, she is not from your Jiaofang department. The eunuch in charge took a closer look. There were so many people in the teaching workshop that he couldn't remember clearly. Take off the veil and let us take a look. Shen Yu was as motionless as a mountain. The manager reached out to pick it off when a cup hit him, making a crisp sound when it landed on the ground. He was startled immediately. Xieting Zhou took back his hand slowly and said quietly, if you dare to touch her with your dirty hands, I don't mind chopping off your hands myself. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 140. The manager quickly took a few steps back and said, I don't dare, I don't dare. Since His Highness is interested in me, how can I have the courage? Xieting Zhou looked at Shen Yu, since you have found this place, why don't you come in yet? Shen Yu held up her skirt and strode into the room. She felt that her gait was too heroic, so she quickly stopped and walked to Xieting Zhou's side. Xieting Zhou leaned on the pillow and raised his head to look at her, are you unhappy? Shen Yu looked at him, wasn't it obvious? How can anyone accept this? Xieting Zhou grabbed her hand and said with a smile, I just came out to have a drink and didn't do anything. Why are you so angry that you can't say anything? He wiped her fingers and his eyes fell on the indelible red. He suddenly pulled hard and Shen Yu fell into his arms unprepared. The whole room was stunned. Didn't it mean that Xieting Zhou is now a womanizer, and he just snatched back his mistress from Zhang Mansion a few days ago? I didn't even look at Fu Ying twice in the Jiaofang department today. He was indifferent even if I asked him to be the first flower picker. Why has he changed his gender now? He had reached this point in the drama. Shen Yu gritted her teeth and snorted softly, you told me clearly that you were meeting a friend, but now? When you meet a friend, you have to come here to meet him. Without a prostitute, we can't talk. Already. She pointed her finger, and what's going on with her? Fu Ying was so frightened that she shrank back a little. Xieting Zhou looked at her with interest. Is this acting really interesting? He really couldn't tell the difference for a moment. Xieting Zhou held Shen Yu's hand and said coaxingly, she is just a wine pourer. She has never touched it with her hands, So she tastes it? Shen Yu struggled and twisted in his arms. Do you need to get so close to pour wine? I'm almost touching you. Can I just let her walk now? Xie Tingzhou coaxed, waving his hand to ask Fu Ying to step aside. Then he said to Li Chang in the room, Xiu is laughing. Xiu is Li Chang's diminutive, and among the princes and noble sons of Shengjing, he is considered to be the best. Seeing Xie Tingzhu's henpecked look, Li Chang raised his glass to his lips and laughed twice. I originally thought that the crown prince was a reviled immortal who didn't eat the fireworks of the world, but I didn't expect that he was also a sweetheart. With the warm fragrance of nephrite in your arms, no one is exempt from vulgarity. Xie Tingzhou pulled Shen Yu into his arms, picked up a handkerchief and wiped her hands, saying in a moderate voice, when you are angry, you just ask the servants to do it. Why do you do it yourself? It hurts to do it, doesn't it hurt? The young prince continued, my two guards are ignorant and have offended the prince's people. They will be severely punished when they turn back. Shen Yu didn't know if he was acting or for real, but her heart couldn't stop beating wildly. How many women in the world could resist Xie Tingzhu's methods? Shen Yu shrank her hand, but Xie Tingzhou held it tightly and whispered in her ear, don't move, there is blood on your hand. Only then did Shen Yu see that there were still blood stains between the fingers of her little fingers and on the edges of her nails that had not been wiped off and had already solidified. Xie Tingzhou wiped her hands while biting her ear, what are you doing? Shen Yu leaned on his shoulder and said with a cold look, kill someone. This sentence was said so calmly, as saying that he had eaten a meal. Xie Tingzhou paused, glanced at her slightly, then lowered his head and wiped her hands for her. Let me wipe your ass again. Shen Yu's cheeks turned red and she corrected, this was just wiping my hands. I could have left. Xie Tingzhou asked, then why didn't you leave? This question stopped Shen Yu, so naturally he couldn't say that she came here to catch an adulterer. Shen Yu leaned on his shoulder, her back to everyone. Others couldn't see her face and didn't know how red her cheeks were at the moment. The two of them were so close and their voices were so soft that other people thought they were flirting, which made other people not know where to turn their eyes. Xie Tingzhou stroked her back, but felt that she was too thin and the gauze was semi-transparent, and those peeking eyes made him unhappy. Bring me the cloak, Xie Tingzhou waved. Fu Ying hurriedly took the cloak and brought it forward. Xie Tingzhou took the cloak and spread it out, covering the person in his arms tightly. It's so hard for people to even take a look at it. Li Chang smiled, looked at the manager at the door who was rubbing his hands anxiously, and asked, what's the matter? The manager hurriedly said, go back to the little prince, someone died in front of you. It was just a person dying, and Li Chang didn't take it seriously at all. Some guests were generous and ruthless. It was common for a sister to die today and a maid to die tomorrow. Who is it? Li Chang asked calmly. The manager said anxiously, it's the young master of the Dou family, Dou Cheng. What? Li Chang spilled the wine in his hand. Dou Cheng is not a person, but his relationship with the Zhang family is well known in the capital. Dou Cheng is the only member of the Dou family. The important thing is that he is Zhang Lianzi's cousin. The officer in charge said anxiously, little county master, that's not all. The murderer was Wen Leshan, the nephew of Lord Minister Wen of the Ministry of War. Li Chang pushed the woman in his arms away and asked coldly, tell me again, who is the murderer? It was Wen Lixheng who killed Dou Cheng, the steward said. The Dou family's servants have already gone to report to the official. People from Shuntian Mansion will be here soon. But what should we do? Li Chang stood up and cupped his hands towards Xie Tingzhou, Your Highness, I'm sorry to accompany you. Something happened in the building now, which has ruined His Highness's interest. Please don't blame me. Your Majesty, please rest first. I'll go take a look at the front to see if it's okay. People disturb. Xie Tingzhou hugged Shen Yu, since Xiu has something to do, I can't stay for a long time. There will be no end to the trouble at home. Shen Yu hit him with her elbow and warned in a low voice, "You're overacting." Xie Zhou smiled and said, "Tsuyu, let's go first. We'll leave on our own." Everyone in the room was gone at once, and Shen Yu backed away from Xie Zhou's arms with her hands. Xie Zhou felt that his arms were empty, and the room felt a little colder. "You are very courageous." Shen Yu complained, "Who told you not to take me with you?" Xie Zhou just followed the trick, and hearing the blaming words made him feel physically and mentally comfortable. "When Leshan killed someone, what's going on? Let's talk about it when we get back." "Let's go." Xie Zhou stood up and said. Shen Yu stood up, and her cloak slid to the ground. She arranged her clothes. The two of them were hugging each other just now, and their clothes were all messed up. Xie Zhou looked up and down. "Where did the clothes come from?" Shen Yu said naturally while sorting out. "A prostitute's cupboard was rummaged through, and I threw mine into the stove behind and burned it." "Does it look good?" She turned around in front of him. Xie Zhou took another look, his Adam's apple moved slightly, and he turned his face away and said, "It's shoddy, but you're still a man's wearer." Shen Yu glanced at him, and Xie Zhou grabbed her wrist when she was about to go out. He picked up the cloak and surrounded her tightly, and also covered her with the hood. After leaving the room, Shen Yu's hand was still in his grasp. As soon as she twitched, the grip on her hand became even tighter. "Xie Zhou, what are you hiding from?" Shen Yu stopped struggling and let him lead her to the front door. "There are people from Shuntian Prefecture both inside and outside the Jiaofang division. They probably mobilized all the manpower available in the Yamen. There are 3 floors inside and 3 floors outside, surrounding the Jiaofang division like an iron barrel." Xie Zhou took Shen Yu out. When Shuntian Prefecture Yin Lufu saw him, he did not dare to stop him. He hurriedly asked people to get out of the way and personally escorted Xie Zhou to the carriage. "Wait. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 141. The sound of horse hooves came one after another. Zhang Lian took the lead. He rushed over after receiving the news and saw Xie Zhou and others were leaving. As soon as he saw Xie Zhou, he felt that the matter was related to him. After all, Doqing had a grudge against him because of Shen Yu. Xie Zhou paused slightly, turned around and asked, "Is there something wrong, Mr. Zhang?" Zhang Lianzi glanced at the man in the cloak and looked at Xie Zhou. "What a coincidence. Wherever the prince is, something will happen." Xie Zhou smiled and said, "I also think it's a coincidence that I meet Mr. Zhang every time. Mr. Zhang rushes to collect your cousin's body in such a hurry. The emotion is really touching." Zhang Lianzi was unmoved and stared at the person next to him. "Why is the person next to you wearing a cloak? Is it possible that he is invisible to others?" Xie Zhou gently pushed Shen Yu behind him. "It's not that she is shameless, but that not everyone deserves to see her." The two were at war with each other, and Lu Fu couldn't afford to offend anyone, so he quickly stepped in to mediate. "You two have something to say. If you have something to say, it's all colleagues who bow their heads but don't raise their heads to meet you." Zhang Lianzi was too lazy to listen to him. The more Xie Zhou refused to let him see, the more problematic it became. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Here comes someone." The guards took 2 steps forward, and Xie Zhou's guards all drew their swords. Mother Lu Fu was very frightened. "You can't do it, you can't do it. We are here to handle cases, not to make enemies." Neither side gave in. Seeing that the stalemate could not continue, Shen Yu pulled Xie Zhou's sleeve. "Your Highness." Xie Zhou turned around to comfort him. "It's okay. You go and wait for me in the carriage. Zhang Lianzi froze because of the sound of your highness. If he heard it correctly, the woman's voice was Shen Yu. You. He took a step forward and immediately took back his steps. He knew that Shen Yu was now in Bailin Palace, but he didn't expect that Xie Zhou would bring her to such a place of fireworks. Your highness, if we really leave like this, others will think that we have ghosts. Shen Yu calmly raised her hood after saying this. There were a few gentle gasps from the crowd. It is said that it is quite interesting to look at beauties under the lamp, but it is even more interesting to look at beauties under this overwhelming torch, especially the beauties who cannot be seen clearly. Lu Fu remembered Xie Zhou's words that some people are not worthy of seeing, so he only glanced at it briefly and said, of course not, the suspect has been arrested, so. When the Yamen escorted Wen Leshan out, Lu Fu changed his mind and said, it's right here. Wen Lixheng's eyes were dull, and several government officials behind him also escorted several people out, including 2 eunuchs, another one who was Fueyao, and several young masters following behind. Lu Fu stepped forward and said, these young masters are witnesses and we need to go to the Yamen together. The person who died was the cousin of the Minister of Household Affairs, and the murderer was the nephew of the Minister of War. How could they, who were drinking together, refuse such a big deal? Xie Zhou helped Shen Yu get on the carriage, and a thin figure suddenly rushed out of the Jiaofang department and headed straight for the carriage. The guard stepped forward to stop her, and the woman immediately fell to her knees. Your highness, help me. Before Xie Zhou entered the carriage, he turned around and took a look. It was the prostitute who was waiting in Liu Bei Pavilion just now. The director of the Jiaofang chased her out and reprimanded her in a half-yin voice, tie her up quickly. A lowly creature like you is worthy of his highness. There are several great people here. How dare they act without permission? Fu Ying took a few steps on her knees in fear. Your highness, it is impossible for my sister to kill anyone. Please save her. Now she had no one to turn to, she was just a familiar face in front of Xie Zhou. Xie Zhou was silent for a moment, then turned to look at Lu Fu. Lu Fu immediately said, it's like this. Do Qing died in this prostitute's room, so he needs to be taken back for interrogation. Xie Zhou said to Fu Ying, in this case, Mr. Lu will handle it impartially. Lu Fu blushed, your highness is right. Having said this, Fu Ying still kowtowed stubbornly and cried, please, your highness, please save her. I am willing to work as a cow or horse for your highness. Xie Zhou understood in an instant that this case seemed simple, but the dark water inside was getting deeper. Do Qing died in the prostitute's room, and the Do family would not let her go. Wen Leshan was the murderer, and the Wen family would also try to find someone to take the blame, so putting this prostitute in the middle was undoubtedly the best choice. Lu Fu and Xie Zhou said nonchalantly, this beauty has come to me to beg you. Do you think I care about this matter or not? Lu Fu knew that his attitude was actually to take care of it, but he didn't say it clearly. After all, he had been in the officialdom for many years and had practiced well in Hizini's kung fu, so Lu Fu said, how can I influence your highness's decision? However, your highness and the little prince are here, as well as the minister, and several of them are here to bear witness, I will definitely handle it impartially. With this thought, Lu Fu calmed down. The Wen family would definitely put pressure on him, but now that he had brought these 3 people in, it would be a guarantee. Xie Zhou lifted the curtain and entered. The light inside the carriage was dim and Shen Yu's face could not be seen clearly, but Xie Zhou felt that something was wrong with the atmosphere. Shen Yu folded her arms and said in a strange tone, your highness is a hero who saves a beauty. He is so majestic. Xie Zhou smiled and sat down next to her, aren't I thinking about you? If that person dies, where will you find the things you want? Besides, if you sell a favor, Fu Ying will lower your guard. It will be easier for you then. There are many reasons, Shen Yu muttered, I have my own methods. If you want to save yourself, you still have to rely on me. This person is really hard to coax tonight. Xietingzhou looked at her for a moment, then suddenly lifted the curtain. I forgot to mention it. Everyone in front of the Jiaofang secretary's door looked at him one after another. Xietingzhou glanced at Fu Ying, then turned to Zhang Lianzi and said, "There's no need to be a cow or a horse. It's not my intention to save you, but my wife is kind-hearted. When things have to be settled, I only take action to coax my wife just happy." Lu Fu was shocked. "Nanin, ni Isa." Li Chang said in surprise, "When did Ting Zhou get married? Could it be that the one just now?" Exactly. Xietingzhou's clothes were pulled from behind. He clenched the hand calmly, but only looked at Zhang Lianzi and said, "Don't you know that Ziyu, apart from the matchmaker's words, and a private life decision?" Zhang Lianzi suddenly clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and looked back with sharp eyes. Li Chang smiled and said, "As expected of you." "I have no choice." Xietingzhou turned his head and said, "Now that I am in Shengjing, it is very inconvenient to do things. I can only obey the power, because I am afraid that she will attract people's attention." After that, he smiled and lowered the curtain. As soon as the light dimmed, Xietingzhou saw a figure rushing toward him. Before he could react, Shen Yu threw him down on the low couch in the carriage. Everyone outside the carriage only heard a boom inside the carriage, followed by the sound of Xietingzhou taking a breath. This. Li Chang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The younger brothers and sisters are really strong. That's right. Xietingzhou was pressed down by Shen Yu and lying on the low couch. He blinked and said innocently, "My wife is really strong." Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 142. The coachman raised his whip and the carriage began to move. Shen Yu sat astride Xietingzhou and said viciously, "You did it on purpose." Xietingzhou raised his eyebrows. "The crown princess is smart, isn't it obvious?" "Of course it was intentional." Shen Yu's face instantly turned red because of the words prince princess. "What did you just say? Who agreed to make a lifelong commitment to you? You and Pei Chunli can have a private lifelong marriage, but you can't with me. That's different." Xietingzhou held her waist. "You are afraid that Zhang Lianzi will hear the misunderstanding." "How can I?" Shen Yu glared at him. "I don't have the time to care about him." Xietingzhou was quite pleased with what he heard. He laughed. "Why do I feel that when I saw Zhang Lianzi's expression just now, he was happier than before after winning a battle?" Shen Yu glanced at him. "You are so boring." The wheels of the carriage knocked over a stone, and Shen Yu and Xietingzhou shook heavily along with the carriage. This gesture was too ambiguous, and Shen Yu was stunned for a moment, staring at Xietingzhou's face, watching his eyes gradually deepen and darken. "It's been too long since I've had any communication, and I was disturbed by her last time." Xietingzhou only felt that a fire was lighting up from under his body at this moment, burning him. "Sit up a little higher," Xietingzhou said in a muffled voice. "Stop it." Shen Yu suddenly came to her senses and put her palms on his chest to get down, but she slapped him on the side of his ribs. Xietingzhou snorted, and Shen Yu's hand slipped and fell on his upper body. Just as he was about to stand up, his hands on his waist felt heavy. "Stop moving," Xietingzhou said in a hoarse voice. One hand was holding her waist and the other was holding her back. Shen Yu tensed her body, feeling like she was stiff as a fire stick, and she didn't dare to move. She straddled him, their bodies touching closely, as if the slightest movement was a deliberate move. Xietingzhou pressed his chin against her temples, his heavy breathing echoed in his ears. He closed his eyes and thought that he was lucky. Fortunately, she was wearing someone else's clothes, and the smell of makeup and powder was not her usual familiar smell, which brought him back to his senses. Xietingzhou gradually calmed down in this unfamiliar smell. Shen Yu felt that her hot body gradually returned to a peaceful temperature. Are you okay? Xieting Zhou opened his eyes, and the car curtains were shaking, letting in the moonlight. Not yet. After a while, Shen Yu asked again, are you okay yet? He curled his lips and said, yeah. Shen Yu gradually realized something was wrong. She stood up and looked down at his face. Her hair was thick and thick, hanging down on his cheeks. Xieting Zhou's fingers slipped through her hair, and when he reached the ends of her hair, he tilted his head slightly and kissed her. His gaze didn't shift even a little bit, locking on her face. Shen Yu felt that he seemed to be bewitching her and inciting her. Every look and movement showed her that I am yours and you can do whatever you want. Before her thoughts collapsed, she jumped up from him, leaned her back against the car wall and closed her eyes. What are you doing? Xieting Zhou stood up and asked in surprise. Leave me alone, Shen Yu said calmly, I'm in meditation. Lovers are always attracted to each other involuntarily, wanting to hug and kiss. All skin-to-skin contact can bring physical and mental pleasure. No matter how simple-minded a person is, he cannot bear it when he encounters a monster like Xieting Zhou. Xieting Zhou laughed, isn't it me who should enter samadhi? Shen Yu opened her eyes and glanced at him. His robe had been messed up by the unintentional rubbing just now. He was lying half-lying as if he had been abused just now. Xieting Zhou followed her gaze and looked at him. Tisk, with this look, what will they think when you get off the carriage later? Will they think you are going too far? What else can you think? Shen Yu knew that he was evil at heart, so she said angrily, of course I guess that His Highness the Crown Prince is having fun in the Jiaofang division, and maybe he has been taken advantage of by several prostitutes. Are you willing to let someone take advantage of me? Xieting Zhou raised his eyes and asked her. Shen Yu leaned forward and grabbed his collar, I've only been here for one night at the Jiaofang Bureau, and you've already learned how to have sex with those prostitutes, right? Xieting Zhou smiled and shrugged, lifted the curtain and looked out, saying, we are almost at the palace, you should first think about how to hide it with your appearance. After his reminder, Shen Yu felt that this was really a problem. Otherwise, Xieting Zhou drawled, you take it off and I'll take off my robe to you. How can that be done? Shen Yu glared at him and whispered, brothers probably didn't recognize me, right? The guards didn't see her face, so they just thought that Xieting Zhou had brought a woman back from the Jiaofang division. They never thought of Shen Yu. But 11 Feng Changliu was different. He didn't notice Shen Yu, but the person who came back was a woman, so he would probably take a guess at her. Your Highness, we have arrived. The carriage stopped at the gate of the palace. The car curtains were closed tightly, and there was no response for a long time. The guards thought that the prince was asleep inside, but the next moment they saw Xieting Zhou jumping out of the car with a tightly wrapped person in his arms. King Piju was quite lively tonight, and Changliu gave Xifeng a headache by making the noise alone. Changliu failed to keep an eye on the person and was knocked down by 2 pieces of snack medicine. When he woke up, he came back to Xifeng to cry. Xifeng stood on the porch with his sword in hand and listened to his complaints. I also said that I wanted him to be a witness when the little turtle got married. Changliu shed tears silently and wiped his face wet with tears. 11 Feng, no one would want to be a witness for a turtle, right? It's not a glorious thing. 11 Feng had been tearing him down all night, and Changlu didn't want to talk to him. Zigu said, he is such a bad person. I didn't reveal his secrets to anyone before, but he actually. Xifeng interrupted him, what secret? That's it? He stopped talking as soon as he started, I have decided that I will tell His Highness the secret in person. He is so evil that my little turtle is about to starve to death from him. Xifeng continued to make trouble, didn't you just feed me? Can you starve to death? Changliu said firmly, that's just eating the last meal but not the next one. Then he turned and glared at Xifeng, brother, please turn your elbows outward as well. Zifeng felt very wronged. I just asked the truth. Footsteps approached, and a person stepped into the courtyard. Changliu wiped away his tears and stood up from the threshold. Your Highness, When I got closer, I saw someone in Xieting's arms, but the cloak was too tight and I couldn't see clearly. Who is this? Xieting Zhou carried the man forward and said, Your master's man. Changliu thought about it. The prince went to Jiao Fangxi and brought someone back, most likely a prostitute. Didn't you fall out of favor at that time? Thinking of this, Changliu began to sympathize with Shizhi again, and couldn't express the complaint he wanted to make. Zifeng glanced at Changliu and continued to undermine him. Didn't you say you knew a secret about Shizhi? Xieting Zhou stopped warily. What secret?